Sure.
Okay. I want to talk about evolution a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, because when I was young, I always believed in God, but never really knew why. I guess I just grew up like that. I did start studying evolution a few years ago, and that's what really made me believe in God. Now, I wanted to give you some examples of... okay, wait, I have some notes here that I took before calling. Yeah. I'll give you the example of a car that has no... What?
Hey, when you say you studied evolution and it led to and it strengthened your belief in God, what do you mean by studied evolution? Because this is a new one.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't. Okay, studied maybe is a big word. I researched. I did some personal research on evolution with information from different sources.
And you came out believing in God more strongly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Why?
Well, okay, I'll give you this example of, it's an example I like to use a lot because it's very simple. But if I take, for example, a car, and I take off the wheels, I take off the engine, take off the steering wheel, obviously the car's not going to run.
Sure.
Well, that's a few reasons why the car won't run, but if I just take off the wheels, it won't run. I don't have to take off anything else. So this is where I'm going at with this.
Sure, I think what you're talking about is this idea called irreducible complexity.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's just an example of, there are some examples, some things that I saw about evolution that don't work. And there are many things that, in my opinion, don't work. But I only need one of these things to not believe in evolution.
Wait, let me ask real quick. I'll let you get to this, Stephen. Do you know what the idea of irreducible complexity is?
Yeah, I do.
Because what you described sounds virtually identical.
I know. That's a coincidence. I didn't want to have it refer to that.
Okay, I'll let you continue then.
I just wanted to show the example that I can have just one reason to...
Oh, he's comparing the car to his reasons, not to evolution.
Okay.
Okay. I wanted to get your opinion on this because it's not an example that I hear very often. Actually, I don't think I've ever heard this example when people talk about evolution. Okay, for example, if we take like a fish and we give it 1 million years to transform into a lizard, for example. All right?
Okay.
You're following me?
I understand what you're saying so far.
Okay. If we go halfway through this change, let's say at 500,000 years, what would we find there? I believe that we'd find a creature with semi-legs or parts, body parts that aren't really used for anything just yet. And if we look at this creature, we probably couldn't tell if these parts are growing or if they're being erased.
Sure. What you're talking about is a transitional form between a fish and a lizard.
Sort of. Oftentimes when I hear evolutionists talking about transitional forms, they always point out or show photos of animals that are complete.
No, you know why? Because every living thing is a transitional form.
Well, that's what I disagree with, because I don't have any parts on me that are not being used right now.
What about like, you know, there's some parts like your, you're shouting out appendix. What about your nipples? Are you a male?
Actually, you know what? The nipple thing, it's apparently it's because the nipples are developed before the sex of the baby is developed.
But why would the males have them? Why would the males develop them?
Well, because when the nipples develop, we're not at the stage of are we a male or a female just yet. But what I wanted to get into...
It's a part you're not using.
Sorry?
It's a part you don't use that's on your body.
That's right.
To be fair, though, it's not a part that's useless within a species.
What I mean about a part that we're not using is not like an earlobe or an appendix, but something that's big and obvious.
Well, I'm sorry, but you don't get to redefine everything in order to get rid of what you don't like. The fact of the matter is, every living thing that has ever lived is a transitional form. We are all the offspring of our ancestors, and change happens. We can document and chronicle this change. The common ancestry of humans and the other great apes is something that's just confirmed. I mean, it's this idea people have a...
What would make you think that if there was a transitional form between a lizard and let's say this is a fish that's devolving towards something like a lizard, if you had the transitional form halfway through, what makes you think that the parts would be useless? They would just be used in a different way than they would ultimately be used by the lizard, and that they...
It's just that the image that I'm getting in my head when I think about this transition is that I just imagine a leg that's growing into a full leg.
Okay, first of all, this image that you've got is kind of flawed, because the one thing that evolution is looking for isn't just positive traits that benefit, but it also selects against negative traits. So as long as something's not sufficiently negative, it can persist and then be adapted to another use. So this idea, you've got a fish with no legs and you've got a lizard with legs, and you're seeing a half a leg. Well, it's not half a leg. It's a leg. It's just a smaller leg, and it just may not function as well as the lizard's leg. But as long as it either provides some positive benefit to that fish or doesn't provide a sufficient negative benefit to be selected against, it persists. It's not a useless...
Well, we have fish that can walk, that have legs, they can go on land. I mean, they propel, and it's like they have little flipper legs. And
that's right.
And those, they're not a leg, but they're a modified flipper thing, and the fish uses it, and it helps the fish. It doesn't need a leg, so you're looking
I
at
agree
it.
with that. But it's still an animal that's complete, and it doesn't have
Well, of course, it's not going to be an incomplete animal. I mean... What is he looking for? Half an animal?
Every animal is
Half
identical.
a leg or a leg.
It's a modified fin. I mean, it's
a leg that's not complete.
It's not a fin. It's not a leg. It's part way through. You're looking for something that goes up to the knee. I mean, really?
No, not that goes up to the knee, because it doesn't actually develop like that. It would
develop like a fin developing into a leg eventually from something like a modified fin that the fish can use like a leg, which is what you see with something, I think it's a lungfish. I might be wrong about the species, but there's a fish that does this, that has these sort of rudimentary, sort of modified flipper leg things.
This reminds me of the half an eye argument, which is absolutely absurd. You know, a lot of anti-evolutionists have said, you know, what use is half an eye? As if the eye, our eye is some pinnacle, and way back when there was something without an eye and it evolved half an eye. And that's not the way evolution works. And by the way, in the sense that evolution does work, half an eye turns out to be a lot more useful than no eye, which is why we have eyes. You can see, you can go online and find out. I know there's old Richard Dawkins videos of this, and there's some newer ones too, where you start with just light-sensitive cells on the skin, which provide a benefit, and then in some cases they cup, which provides more benefit because now you have directional light, and in some cases they get down to a pinpoint where that can just be a muscle, like a mollusk eye. We find examples of all the different various forms of eyes in this process throughout both the fossil record and in the living world now. So it's not.
Yeah, I've seen some of that stuff.
Sure.
And I would just point out too that evolution, as far as like a changing the traits of a breeding population, is only ever been observed and achieved through evolution up until the point we did genetic modification in a lab. I mean, there's never been any other observed mechanism for changing the traits of a breeding population other than evolution. I mean, I don't know where you would have seen anything different than that. Because all domestic breeding is based on evolution. It wouldn't work. You wouldn't get new breeds of dogs if evolution didn't work.
There's another thing. I realize that I'm not trying to insult you by recommending this. I promise.
Don't worry.
It is a kid's book, but Richard Dawkins' new book, The Magic of Reality, talks about evolution. It has a really good example of it, and it's actually, there's an example also in what's the book that he had before that on evolution? Greatest story ever told. Anyway,
Greatest Show on Earth.
Greatest Show on Earth. Thank you. Boy, I went right to a Christian book. Sorry. And that's that if you begin with an animal, rabbit, whatever, and you trace its lineage back, every single one of those is of the same species as its parent. It's not like this animal gives birth to something radically different. You would witness between each one, almost no change or very little change. And yet when you view the timeline, you can see vast changes between them. And then if you come up to this hairpin and follow a different lineage, you get down to a completely different animal. And the differences between the two animals at the outer branches are vast. They're far greater than the differences between any or between the branch and the linchpin.
There was one
Yeah, I
exception
would have
to
to
this.
see that. I haven't seen what you're talking about there, but I'd be interested in seeing what
Yeah,
that's all about.
there's another example though. There's a silver fox experiment that you might want to look up. It's pretty well documented, so it should be easy to Google if you just look up silver fox experiment. But they just took these foxes that were pretty much wild foxes that they had used for fur trade, and they look very wild. I mean, it looks like a pretty ferocious animal. And when they were having trouble handling them because they're not social species, they're very aggressive and don't handle well even in, even when they're used for domestic purposes. And they started breeding for passivity, trying to see if they could breed this into a more passive animal that would be easier to handle in their trade. So they started breeding passive ones that seemed to be less aggressive to see what they would come up with. And what was weird is that ultimately the entire look of the animal was altered. It wasn't just the passivity. They didn't just get more passive silver foxes. The change was so incredible that they had to actually name it something different. And it came out in considerably few breeding cycles, based on timelines for what you think of as evolution. They came out and ultimately they had like big floppy ears, they had curly tails, they had soft, colorful coats. They didn't even look like the parent species after not too many generations. It was fairly, in my opinion, one of the most stark observed changes through breeding animals.
And we're coming down on almost out of time, and I
Sorry.
apologize for that. But when you say you hadn't seen examples of this, and that your study of evolution had strengthened your belief in God, the reason I find that baffling is this. First of all, we've got the entire fossil record, which doesn't have every one of these. We don't have a sample from every generation. But we support that with the genetic evidence. And when you look at, for example, Francis Collins, who's an evangelical Christian and not only accepts evolution, but said that DNA evidence alone is enough to confirm common ancestry between humans and all the other apes, etc. And Ken Miller, who's a Catholic and an evolutionary scientist. This is not something evolution is not something that is just for atheists. It's a science, and it is the theory of evolution by natural selection is the theory that explains the facts. But the facts are that these things change. And so you have this idea in your head of half a leg or whatever, and somehow this has strengthened your belief in God, and I don't know why, because even if evolution were confirmed to be wrong today, that would not add one bit of evidence for the claim that a God exists or interacts in any way with reality.
No, that's right. But that was just one example,
So how can evolution
so
possibly?
much other stuff.
We're out of time. They're putting up the credits.
Yeah. All right.
I apologize. Call back another week or send us an email at tv@atheist-community.org. Thanks to everybody on the screen who has formatted the whole new version of the Atheist Experience to be in compliance with public access television rules. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.